Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the Gilbert to my Sullivan, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
This week we're talking about furries.
So, furries, if you've never been on the internet before, maybe you don't know what a furry is. A furry is a person who really likes anthropomorphic animals. Anthropomorphic meaning human-like.
Mm-hmm.
Literally anthro from human, morphic as in shape, so human-shaped animals. If you are looking for a quick guide of what an anthropomorphic animal is, look at cartoons, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, SWAT Cats, and DuckTales.
Disney's Robin Hood,
Zootopia, and they go back farther than that. Anthropomorphic animals, literally you can find illustrations for Renard and I'm blanking on the wolf's name. The old stories of Renardine and I'm a Gunnar Krigg court reader. I should know this.
I know. I'm blanking right there with you.
Sengren.
That's right.
Sengren. Where they draw animals as though they're walking on hind legs and they're grabbing things like they've got hands. And just to prove that this is older than dirt, look at Egyptian gods, right? That's a human body with an animal head. This is just apparently a thing that humans do. Mm-hmm. I don't think that there's any particular cultural lineage to it. I think that it's independently created a lot. And so sometimes these creatures show up in a universe and they make sense. I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a good example of, makes sense, but it's a human world filled with humans. Mm-hmm. And then you make some monsters, which are turtle men. Okay, that was the result of an experiment. The question I have are the universes where that's not true, where you just have lots of animal people running around. So Zootopia or Robin Hood from Disney or SWAT Cats or the animated series of the Mighty Ducks or DuckTales or Tailspin or any of those Disney afternoon shows.
There's just a lot of duck-themed Disney characters, I think.
Okay, we're going to take a side tangent here, which is, I may have to cut this out, but my headcanon is, I can't even explain it because you didn't watch the Mighty Ducks television show, did you?
I did not.
Okay, I gotta back up. So in Darkwing Duck, Darkwing's civilian persona, Drake Mallard, has an adopted daughter named Gosalyn something. I forget her last name, Gosalyn. And she is a plucky redheaded duck who's super action oriented and wants to be a superhero. All right.
Okay.
Now, and this is a duck universe. Everybody in this universe is ducks. Okay. Now, in the Mighty Ducks animated television show, there is a place called Duck World full of ducks. And in them, there is a character who is a plucky redheaded duck, female character who is super action oriented and a badass. And who I am just going to assert is grown up Gosalyn. That Duck World and Ducktail and the Darkwing Duck universe are one and the same, just in separate parts of the timeline. And that Gosalyn grows up to be Mallory is her name, because every duck name has to be some sort of pun, I think.
Sure, yeah.
For the most part. And and therefore, anyway, that's my assertion, is that those are the same character going by two different names, or maybe they're alternate universes of one another, but they're connected. And I'm probably going to have to cut that 4-minute diatribe. Anyway, I have a strangely large amount of opinions about the DuckTales and extended universe. Because here's the thing, human-like animals raise questions that are very uncomfortable.
Sure, yeah.
So I think the classic one that a lot of people have is Goofy from the Disney universe, who is canonically a dog. In fact, his original name was Dippy Dog, until he was renamed George Geef, and then and then eventually was renamed to be G.G. Goofy Goof is his full name. He is canonically a dog, and his universe of Goof Troop is full of dog people. Mm-hmm. But Goofy also interacts with Mickey Mouse, who has himself a non-anthropomorphic dog called Pluto. And so the question becomes, what differentiates Goofy from Pluto? Why does Goofy have to wear pants and have a job, and Pluto runs around on all fours and eats out of a bowl? What is the distinction here? Similarly, from a strictly biological point of view, if we're looking in a universe the Robin Hood universe or the Zootopia universe, where all of these creatures are obviously sentient and they walk on all four or walk on hind legs and interact, and they all wear pants basically. Mm-hmm. like what caused so many different species to undergo the same changes that made them sentient and caused them to be bipedal and like then live in a giant town together? Like what is it that like forced what were previously non-sentient animals, we have to assume, or maybe not, maybe these were all a single species that diverged into what we think of as different animals? I don't know. Like, explain yourself, Zootopia, please.
So I think there's sort of stems from like, they have like some event where predators stopped preying on prey animals.
Yes.
And that strikes me as like some sort of quasi-magical event, so to speak.
Okay. Quasi-magical.
Because I mean,
is this an uplift scenario? Did aliens come in and try to make...
I could see maybe that's the case, like an uplifting or...
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get... That's like basically like sort of the world peace kind of story, more or less. Like, I know they love to touch on, themes of racism and whatnot in Zootopia itself. But just and then they all lived happily together in this one town, as a shining beacon of hope for all other animals. Yeah.
I'm down with it being an uplift scenario.
Okay.
Because the idea of there being a sentient alien race that spends its time going around and turning animals into like subversions of itself is kind of interesting. So like we're imagining this. Is this a world where like are we in an alternate Earth where like there are all of the animals, but they just for whatever reason happen not to have the genus Homo? Or are we talking about a world that like, is it our world after the humans leave or are dead? Maybe like, how do we have a world without humans, I guess? Or are there humans? Like,
I do like sort of a post-human world.
Okay.
Like, humans have come and gone. And there's like maybe even like remnants and legacy, like their legacy is still seen in some way throughout the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of impressive how quickly our modern society, our modern artifacts might begin to degrade after we go. Like concrete's got a lifetime of like 30 years before it starts to break down. Skyscrapers would start falling over without maintenance, 10, 15 years after we're all gone. Let's assume, because I like apocalypse, I like post-apocalyptic worlds, but I'm not down for all humanity being wiped out in an apocalypse right now for reasons of, the world.
Sure.
And so I'm thinking maybe we're looking at a situation where humanity has sublimed or like left, something along those lines.
Like, I could see like humanity just said, you know what, rather than fixing, the global climate, change, we're just going to leave. And
like, there's really good evidence to say that's the best thing we could do is just like, stop messing with it. Like we have a really bad track record in terms of like trying to fix things.
Sure. Yeah.
Just leave it and let's go. Okay. So I'm imagining a world where, is this just a follow-up from our previous episode where Frankenstein's monster caused a singularity event and uploaded everybody to a Dyson swarm that's currently floating around the sun and left all the animals behind? Okay. Direct sequel time. All right. And we just left we left all of these creatures.
Now there's an apex species void on the planet. And
yes.
I could see a bunch of animals just sort of simultaneously evolving to fill it, or...
No, I think we messed it up still.
Sure.
But what I'm going to say is backing up to the point where all of humanity was uploaded to a cloud. I'm going to say we took all of our pets too.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Like, because if I'm getting uploaded, I'm bringing Pretty Boy with me. Like,
oh yeah.
So there are no dogs and maybe there are no cows and pigs too. Although pigs are they go wild really quickly. So we may not need to worry about them. Okay. And then, so did we leave behind like a genetic virus or something like that like made its way out and then caused this problem? Because if it was left to purely natural phenomenon, then you wouldn't imagine that all these disparate species would evolve in the same way.
No,
like unless there was like some incredible pressure that was like it would have to be an intelligence basically trying to guide them in that way. Yeah. So I'm thinking more like it has to be...
Yeah, it's some kind of uplifting or evolutionary abnormality where it's jointly applied across the board.
Yeah. So maybe let's imagine that, humanity leaves and this doesn't start happening immediately. This is something that happens thousands of years in the future. So like the remnants that we have that remain of humanity are pretty much gone. There's like the pyramids in Egypt,
sure, yeah.
And there's some really big mega structures that we created, but that's kind of it. And then do we want like a cyber virus or sort of like a nanotech solution, or direct genetic engineering, or
I could see it like being like maybe like a terraform experiment or something. Like someone like came back and was like, hey, remember Earth? What if we fix that? And then so they tried a few things, dicked around with it a bit, and well, that didn't work, and then they just leave. But that had some impact on the local fauna.
What about it's actually a colonization thing where at some so imagine we're all humanity and of all of our pets are living in a virtual world in a Dyson swarm around the sun. And they start realistically trying to be like, well, we're stuck here in the solar system because interstellar travel is a pain in the ass. There's really not a good reason where none of us have physical bodies anymore. So let's not worry about trying to transport physical bodies to other solar systems. What if instead we just like upload a bunch of consciousnesses into a ship? We're going to fly that ship to another universe or to another solar system, and then it'll make bodies for us there.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that it finds an interesting world, like a world that's got life or whatever, and then it tries to make human compatible bodies that from the biome from which they are going to visit. So like it flies to an alien world and it looks for creatures that are roughly compatible with humans and makes them more human-like in order to then download human consciousnesses into them.
Okay, yeah.
And so it's like maybe it does this through nanotech, maybe it does it through genetic editing, something along those lines, but it's deliberately designed to do this. And what happened was that some of that virus or technology or whatever accidentally got targeted at Earth. And so that it went back into our home planet, which had recovered at this point to, a wild state where there's lots of these creatures running around, little birds and bees and mice and stuff like that. And it says, okay, let's start with the mammals. So like, okay, we're going to grab these wolves and these foxes and these bison and stuff like that. We're going to like put them up on their back legs and we're going to give them a brain that like thinks and acts a lot like a human so that we could download a human mind into it. But then the second part of it never happens. Like they never get the download. They just change the creatures and then they leave them to fend for themselves. And so they start to and because they've like changed their form, I think that actually does explain to a certain extent why they start living together, because they can recognize that like, oh, I am a lot less like a fox now. Like the regular unaltered foxes are different than to me. But I actually have a lot in common with that anthropomorphic bison over there, because we both like stand up on our hind legs and can learn how to speak and use fire and
that street shark over there. And
hey man, they're jawsome. Were street sharks in a world full of sharks? I'm now really it's been a long time.
I want to say it was humans and street sharks, because I remember that being like really weird to me.
Yeah, it's fine here. The Google image search is not helping me. It's just these sharks. And apparently a narwhal? No, he's a marlin. Okay, that makes more sense.
Does it?
Yeah, I mean, because they weren't. Oh my God, there's people that have like street shark sonas.
Of course there
are. This is a rabbit hole. By the way, if you don't know what we're talking about, Street Sharks was a cartoon from the 90s where I don't remember if they were originally sharks or if they were originally dudes, but like they become these huge shark men, and they were gene slammed into being street sharks by a dude. Okay, so yeah, they were humans that were turned in. So this is Road Rovers or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles territory, where like it's a world full of humans that they then created these particular sharks. Same thing with gargoyles, like they're still humans.
Yeah, that was a big aspect of early 90s, late 80s.
Yeah. Do you want some cursed knowledge about gargoyles?
Yes, lay it on me.
Greg Weisman, the guy who created gargoyles, and got kicked out of the show eventually because he wasn't doing what the network wanted to. He's also the guy who made Young Justice and several other good shows.
Interesting.
He has a tendency to want to answer all of the not safe for work questions that his fans give them. And so he made up an alternate persona of himself that he could like answer as this dude. And like, so we know a lot about like gargoyle reproduction and like whether or not these characters were actually boning or not. And he's even published some, you can't call it gargoyles officially because he doesn't own the IP, but it's definitely gargoyles porn. Like he wrote a comic book and had somebody draw it, and it's just gargoyles with the serial numbers filed off. Yeah, honestly, goals.
Like I do feel like a lot of these shows were just someone's fetish, just legitimized.
Oh my God, yes. Speaking about gargoyles, okay. So did you watch Batman the Animated Series?
Yes.
Okay, so there's an episode of Batman the Animated Series where Catwoman gets injected by some gene manipulation and she turns into an orange Catwoman, like a tabby cat.
Sure, yeah.
And then she's like taken off to an island and she meets a panther dude who's like also genetically engineered, and they kind of like have a thing going on. Okay, so in Gargoyles, there's an episode where this random lady off the street named Maggie also gets genetically altered into an orange cat lady, except this time she has wings, and she falls in love with a large panther man who this time also has wings. And they and except in this one, instead of like getting turned back at the end, they just decide, no, we're together now, and they bugger off into the background. The wife, the person who wrote the one episode of Batman also was married to the person who wrote that one episode of Gargoyles.
Oh,
so it's like, I know way too much about y'all's personal lives now, because like, that is too close. Y'all definitely, I don't want to see your AOL Instant Messenger transcripts from that period, because I know exactly what I'd see now.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you're like, yeah, guys, you're not even being subtle anymore. Y'all's are just furries.
Yeah. Back before they really had a name for it.
Oh no, the furry community dates back to like the 80s, I think.
Does it?
Like, yeah, they're old school.
I guess I'm projecting my knowledge of it to when I learned about it. So
yeah, they're a little bit older than that. Anyway,
yeah, I'm sure.
What the fuck were we talking about before I got off on a weird diatribes about like other people's fetishes that I know too much about?
See, we were talking about.
It was an uplift virus that was created for the purposes of transmitting, like to create bodies for us to uplift and for us to download into.
Yes.
Okay. So you have to imagine that so I'm thinking that for the upload thing to work, what has to have happened is like this thing activates and it creates the bodies, creates the original subjects. And that happens in like an immediate thing. Like that's not a 100-year transformation, right? Like they just do this one day. So I'm thinking that's got to be nanotech to me.
So is this a new creature that it's creating, or is it modifying a living creature?
Modifying is more horrific, which makes me want to say that's what we're doing
already.
Because but let's go for that. Yeah, it's just more awful that way. So, but at least this time, like you're supposed to be downloaded into them immediately. Like that's the thing. It's like it creates the body, it changes this creature into a human compatible host, and then the brain is supposed to be uploaded into it immediately. What happened on Earth in this universe is that the changes happened, but then the uploads never happened. So these creatures were allowed to develop normally. Normally, they're allowed to develop from that state without further interference from the humans. So I think that answers some of the follow-up questions, which is things like if they're living in one giant society, there's going to be boinking that happens in between them. So like if a bison man and a cheetah woman get it on, they're not going to create offspring because they're not going to be genetically compatible. And in fact, this leads us to an interesting thing. Did you ever read the Ringworld series?
I don't know that I did.
Okay, so this is just cursed content. I think I have no additional information that's not independently cursed. But Larry Niven in the Ringworld series posits a universe where there's a bunch of different like subspecies of humans living on the same universe, like in the same locales as one another, that are not genetically compatible, and so therefore sex between these species, which cannot result in offspring, becomes like a big part of their culture.
Okay.
Because basically it's safe sex. It's sex that can't create children. It can be done recreationally without and they even have a word for it. And it's pretty blatantly obvious that it is it's just Larry Niven wanting to talk about sex a lot and like for reasons that have entirely to do with him being horny, I think. But what it posits in my mind is the idea that maybe in the culture of these anthropomorphic animals, you could actually develop a taboo against falling in love with your own kind, because romance is meant to be a cross species where there's no results from it. And then the progeny, like mating between like two cheetahs, for example, only happens when you're expecting to try to produce offspring. Like it only happens for the purposes of mating. So that like there's this very specific cultural taboo against mating with members of your own species because that creates life willy-nilly, and that's supposed to be treated more sacrosanct than just regular old sex.
Do you think there's like a built-in self-loathing to these creatures? Like, do they recognize what they were and what they are no longer?
I wonder if that could be treated in multiple different ways, depending on like philosophical ideals within that. Like you could have different movements within the culture.
Sure, yeah.
So like there could be the ones who look at the wild type versions of themselves and go, yes, that is what we should be like. We should be more like the ones that exist in the wild. So they'd be the lions would be looking at the packs of wild lions, because I'm assuming in this universe they didn't transform every version of the creature. It just is some subset of anthropomorphic ones. So wild lions exist. So they look at the wild lions and say, yes, that's what we should be doing. We will model our behavior after the behavior of wild lions. And then there's other ones that would look similar, anthropomorphic creatures would look at them and go, that's the bestial form. That's the one that we sprung from, but that we're not beholden to. We should seek to rise above it. And I like the idea that those are competing ideas that both have their own followings.
Almost in place of like a religion or...
It's like two broad philosophies. It's like, should we try to surpass ourselves or should we try to model ourselves after those types? That'd be kind of cool. And it gives you an inbuilt version of conflict, which is like, you have the, you have to come up with some names for them, the transcendents and the innates or something like that. And so like it becomes a conflict within your universe. Like every faction is either going to be one of these two, and that they don't like each other under normal circumstances. And it builds a way for you to build your, like, because the obvious like way to otherwise build factions would be like, okay, let's do predators versus prey, or let's do mammals versus reptiles, or let's do, each species is its own faction and they have that. And screw that. That's boring. Yeah. Let's go with the philosophy instead.
Oh yeah. I always embrace philosophy as a point of conflict rather than, boring things like racism or.
Yeah. And especially because it's super hard to do the version of that story where like, hyenas versus lions, like that's going to be a big thing. It's like, depending on how you write that story, one of those is going to be coded as an ethnic group, if not both of them.
Exactly.
And you are like, then you're just making a human story in with spots and stripes instead. And screw that. Like that's we've seen that story too many times already. So definitely the philosophy idea I think I'm taking down with. I also like the idea that one thing I will totally grant Zootopia props for doing is introducing the problems of scale.
Yes.
Where like you have elephants and giraffes and lions and mice all living in a single city together, and like therefore they get to live on different levels, Yeah. And that's actually really cool. I like that they played with that some, and I would love to, if we were going to do something in that same universe, I would love to do the same, where like, you have to you literally can't hire certain people for certain jobs because they're not the right size. Unless you can build mech suits or something for them.
Mouse mechs.
That'd be cool. Yeah. So like you could imagine a world where, you have to hire like in a mechanics shop, for example, you could have people like working towards their advantages. You could have the wildebeest who's big and strong moving things around. And then you also have the mice who like crawl inside of engine bays to change wires out and stuff like that. Both being very useful, which would be kind of cool.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting way to, like, I feel like there's a lot of both interesting scenarios you can develop from that, as well as potentials for conflict. Yeah,
for sure. And like, you could even have people making the argument, like the mice could be arguing that like, they should be like, they are more ecologically friendly because they are able to have more people in a smaller amount of space with less resources, because you only need, X number of calories a day to feed a family of mice. Well, to feed a family of elephants, you need, an order of magnitude or two more, and therefore that like you should, there should be policies that favor the mice because they're more useful, or that, you have tax structures incentivized such that like the little people little people, there literally are the small ones amongst them are able to like get away with more because they are less of a strain on resources. And they tax the large ones more. Like that's another divide you could put into it, was be size wise.
And do you think things like lifespans, like relative lifespans are in effect here? Like are the mice like living for like, 2 to 3 years, and then like the lions living for
I think
just don't know how long lions
if
live.
it was me, I'd have to say that everybody gets leveled out to something roughly human.
Okay.
Or possibly, because if this really is a follow up to our Frankenstein idea, it's that everybody has like no natural lifespan because this is a post-death society. Or possibly maybe they're all only designed to last a few dozen years, because the assumption being that if this was meant for exploring the solar system, there's a ship out there that can make you more bodies if you need it. And so therefore, like, they're just sort of meant to wear out and you get a new one. You can go a lot of different ways with that one.
I do kind of like the dynamics of like the scaled lifestyles and like what that means, like when a certain species of creature is like their life cycle is so short compared to the others, but they want to have an equal say in proceedings. And
God, you could almost have like a long-lived species like turtles. Excuse me. You could have turtles like running the society just because they're around long enough to make long-term decisions. Like therefore, and therefore they've, they just get to have it. They, just on the surface of like a mouse only gets to vote in 2 elections because it just doesn't live long enough to see more than a couple of elections. Whereas the turtle votes in hundreds of them because it lives hundreds of years. That's kind of weird and interesting. Yeah. I do like that fact. You could go a lot of different ways with it. I think there's benefits and problems with all of them.
Because I just, for example, the ideas like the problems that arise are the interesting thing to me there.
I'm down with it because what you might end up with is if everybody develops at the same rate, and I'm not entirely sure how quickly sentiences learn, but like if a mouse dies at like 2 years old and it takes 2 years to learn how to speak, like maybe only the oldest mice learn language, and then almost immediately die of old age. And that's kind of up. Like a whole species, a whole population of people who never get past being toddlers is kind of horrific.
or they have a different kind of intelligence or, form of communication. And so they become very seclusive to themselves.
Yeah, because they have a language that can be picked up quickly in a society that like is built around them having such a short lifespan that they have to pick it up really quickly.
And I could see like these shorter lived races being like the kind of primordialist groups.
Yeah, because they have to rely on those instincts and stuff more.
Yeah, and they feel like, it was better when we didn't have this knowledge of our own mortality.
Yeah, that's cool.
And we weren't in a society of, where we're ignored because we can't really contribute, in a meaningful way to the society.
Yeah, where like, that's actually interesting. I mean, like you could go some really interesting ways with that, where where like they might end up with sort of like caretakers, like people who are more long lived, who have like an outsized control of them because somebody has to keep track of them basically, and like make sure that they're just keep track of them year to year, like because there's none of the individuals are around long enough to like really make long-term decisions or carry out long-term projects or even just like have consistency. Like, for example, if you have a society that generations pass quickly, like things like language are going to develop very quickly over time because, they're being transferred from one generation to the other over the course of just every year. There's a new generation of them. And so things like linguistic drift are going to happen very fast.
Yeah.
And therefore, like you've got some poor, I'm trying to think of an elephant who's like trying to just like keep track of mouse language the entire time. There's just this poor elephant linguist being like, okay, we got a vowel shift over here, and now here's some new vocabulary, because otherwise they will actually lose contact with the mice because their language will develop to the point where they can't communicate with them anymore.
And I like the idea that like the mice are still in some way like extremely integral to the society.
Yeah,
like there's just like from a practical standpoint, they cannot lose these mice. So like maintaining this contact with them, even though like everything is pushing them out of this society, like it's hypercritical to the health of the city or the society that they remain.
That is cool. Yeah, that's a neat angle to take on it. So let's think of it. Are there any other like biological questions that this raises? Like Zootopia answers the meat problem by saying that all the predators eat fish, which I think I'm down for. That's a pretty simple thing. Although in this universe, like there's no reason why a anthropomorphic lion couldn't eat a non-anthropomorphic deer. Like the anthropomorphic deer may not have any kind of like problem with that,
I do wonder how what the viewpoint would be on like, like the predators hunting these, the non-ascended animals, as it were.
Yeah.
Especially like with the different philosophies of like, this is the state we want to go back to versus, like we need to rise above our former selves.
Yeah, I also have this mental image of a anthropomorphic cow as a rancher for all of the non-anthropomorphic cows, the non-uplifted cows, and making the argument that like we are the closest ones. We're the ones who gets to make the decisions about these things' fate, about these other creatures' fate, because we are as close as possible, and therefore, and they just happen to make the decision. They don't mind slaughtering them and selling them for meat. Like it's like, well, like we are the ones who are allowed to make the decision. Therefore, we're the ones who are going to do it. That's kind of cool.
And like there would be some animals that like have kind of like that ingrained respect for like that, like this is the circle of life. I mean, this is what happens.
Yes.
This was our lot in life before, and it should continue.
Yeah. And you can't eat like a sentient cow, but like, a regular old cow, whatever, it's all right.
And I feel like there's probably like there's a lot of like pseudo cannibalism, like just from like having these creatures that have grown up like with those instincts being so recent.
Okay.
And I do like the idea that like just from a horror aspect, like the cannibalism is kind of a problem.
Yeah, where people, it's obviously like, I guess if you're a lion that happens to kill somebody and you need to dispose of the body, obviously like you have a tool available to you that like would be harder if you're a human. Yeah. There's also especially the ones who are the innate ones, the ones who are like, no, this is what we do. This is who we were. They might be very much into that and be like, no, like this is what they do in the wild. That's our true natural state. Therefore we should be doing the same. And maybe like, they could be a sort of ritualistic serial killer cult, hunting people down in the night. That's a pretty good horror aspect to it for sure.
Especially if like you come into a do this sort of like a noir detective kind of thing where you enter a room and suddenly like the scent of death hits you. You look and there's like this elephant corpse on the floor, and then hundreds and thousands of tiny little rat eyes, peer and look at you, and they're all just covering the corpse.
Oh, gross. But yeah, definitely. That brings back to the idea you were talking about. You need the mice and the rats for something. Using them as a sort of waste disposal cleanup crew is a pretty reasonable niche for them to fill, amongst other things.
Yeah,
obviously, intelligent creatures could do all kinds of other jobs too. Because you don't want to get too much into that essentialist. Like this creature is meant for this job kind of thing. It gets a bit. Anyway.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's some animals that feel that way, and but on the whole, the society recognizes that that's kind of a way to be. Yeah.
Is there anything else? Because they can't interbreed. We've talked about cannibalism and eating.
We've talked about where they come from,
and we know in this universe, like we're sort of assuming it was mostly like land mammals. We're not worried too much about dolphin people. Probably because whatever the original nanovirus was like. No, that's too much of a leap. We're not going to give this thing. However, like you could have some semi-aquatic animals like otters and maybe seals even, where like, they like kind of half in, half out, right? So that would allow for the inhabitation of some additional biomes. You could live in freshwater lakes and rivers and stuff. That'd be kind of cool.
Sure, yeah.
I think based on what we've described, which was something that took like what looked for like the things that had to change the least. That means it probably wasn't going to be messing with birds. So birds are still probably regular birds. There are no anthropomorphic birds in this world. So we're avoiding a bunch of DuckTales problems.
And as we mentioned before, ducks have been done to death.
Yeah, lots of ducks. And let's see, I think that covers most of the big problems. Yeah, well, I guess we've got a holistic version of anthropomorphic animals for all of our furry friends to start writing.
Sort of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Ooze meets Zootopia.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, on that note, I guess we'll give you guys another 2-week break from us, and we'll see you again.
All right, until next time.
Bye. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. Hey, do you know what would make me really happy if you went out and reviewed this show on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser or any other podcast app that allows reviews? That helps people find the show. It'd be really nice of you. On to the credits. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by me, Scott Paladin, and hosted by myself and my best friend, Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas generated during this program are released under a do what the you want public license.